I should have called a plumber weeks ago. The slow drip from the kitchen sink had become an annoying background noise, one I had somehow grown used to. It was like the ticking of a clock, constant yet easy to ignore, until it wasn't. When the pipe under the sink finally burst, it did so with vengeance. A violent gurgle, a sharp hiss, and then a sudden rush of water spilling onto my kitchen floor. I yelped, jumping back as lukewarm liquid pooled around my bare feet. Panic set in. I fumbled for my phone, heart hammering, and within minutes I was calling for help. Few minutes later, a man entered. He introduced himself as Cassian. I wasn't expecting a man like him. Tall, rugged, and exuding the kind of effortless confidence that made my stomach tighten. His dark eyes flickered with amusement as he stepped into my apartment, toolbox in hand, and I swore he took up more space than physically possible. The scent of him, woodsy with a hint of something spicy, filled the air as he brushed past me. He wore a fitted white tank top, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders, slightly damp from the oppressive heat outside. The sight of him made my breath hitch, and I had to grip the edge of the counter just to steady myself. "So what are we dealing with?" he asked, voice deep, slightly rough. The kind of voice that left goosebumps trailing down my arms. I cleared my throat, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened. Pipe burst. It was just a leak before, but now, well, you can see for yourself. He crouched down, inspecting the mess with an expert eye. Muscles rippled as he reached for a wrench, and I caught myself staring, my gaze tracing the defined lines of his forearms. The way his fingers wrapped around the metal tool sent heat curling in my belly. "You should have called sooner," he muttered, glancing up at me with a smirk. "Looks like your pipes needed some serious attention." If only he knew how much attention I actually needed. I forced a chuckle, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. "Yeah, well, I tend to procrastinate." He arched a brow, tightening a bolt with practiced ease. Not always a good thing. Small problems tend to get bigger when ignored. There was something in the way he said it, like he wasn't just talking about my sink. Like he could see the tension coiling inside me, the unsaid words pressing against my ribs. The air in the kitchen felt thick, charged. I swallowed hard, watching as he worked, each precise movement sending another wave of warmth through me. Then he looked up again, this time holding my gaze a little too long. "Anything else leaking I should know about?" he asked, amusement dancing at the corner of his lips. Oh, he was trouble. And I had never wanted trouble more in my life. I tried to distract myself by busying around the kitchen, but my eyes kept flicking toward Cassian. The way he worked, confident, assured, was intoxicating. His strong hands moved effortlessly as he tightened bolts, tested the pipes, and wiped away stray droplets of water. Every movement was purposeful, and I found myself mesmerized, my breath catching in my throat. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, his gaze meeting mine briefly before he returned to the pipes. The heat in the room wasn't just from the summer air seeping through my windows, it was coming from the tension crackling between us. "Hand me that rag," he said, gesturing toward the counter. I complied, stepping closer, but as I passed it to him, our fingers brushed. A spark shot up my arm, unexpected and electrifying. My stomach clenched, my breath faltering. Cassian's eyes darkened slightly, and I swore I saw something shift in his expression. A flicker of something unspoken, something dangerous. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice lower now. More intimate. I swallowed hard. "No problem." He turned back to his work, but I couldn't ignore the heat pooling in my stomach. Was I imagining things, or was there something more to the way he looked at me? I needed to get a grip. I spun toward the fridge, yanking it open just for an excuse to do something with my hands. I grabbed a bottle of water and took a long sip, trying to cool the warmth creeping up my neck. But my mind refused to focus on anything other than the man crouched in my kitchen, the man whose presence felt larger than life. I heard him exhale sharply, the sound sending another wave of awareness through me. "I think I've got it under control now," he said, standing up. "You won't have to worry about any more leaks." I turned, finding him standing way too close. My throat went dry. "That's good to know," I managed, my voice softer than I intended. Cassian's lips quirked up slightly, his gaze lingering. "Yeah, he murmured, his voice like gravel and silk at the same time. Good to know. The air between us was thick, buzzing. My heart pounded in my chest as he reached for his toolbox, his arm brushing against mine. It was an innocent touch, but it sent a wildfire through me. He should leave. I should thank him, pay him, and send him on his way. But I didn't move. And neither did he. Cassian worked in silence for a while, his large hands expertly handling the wrench. Every now and then he would let out a quiet grunt of effort, and each time, it sent a thrill down my spine. I had no business feeling this way over something as simple as a man fixing my sink, but there was no denying the heat coiling in my stomach. You got a tight space here, he muttered, adjusting his position beneath the sink. I barely suppressed a chuckle. Yeah, it's a snug fit. Hope that's not a problem. Cassian glanced up, amusement flickering in his gaze. Not at all. I like a challenge. My breath hitched. Was this flirting, or was I just reading too much into it? The way his lips curved, the slight glint in his eyes, it had to mean something. Or maybe I was just desperate for it to mean something. I needed to get a grip. But when he suddenly shifted, his shoulder brushing against my knee as he maneuvered under the sink, all coherent thought fled my mind. The contact was brief, but it sent a bolt of electricity through me, leaving me rooted to the spot. Damn. I forced myself to take a step back, pretending to inspect the counter as though it was the most interesting thing in the world. But I could still hear him breathing, hear the scrape of metal against metal as he tightened the pipes. I could still feel the ghost of his touch against my skin. Almost done, he said after a few moments, his voice lower, more focused. Just gotta make sure everything is sealed up nice and tight. I swallowed hard. Take your time. No rush. Another flicker of amusement passed through his expression. Yeah. Thought you'd want your kitchen back. I don't mind, I admitted, watching as he tested the pipes, checking for any leaks. Besides, I'd rather have it done right than fast. Cassian's smirk deepened. Good philosophy. I bit the inside of my cheek, resisting the urge to fan myself. Was he doing this on purpose? Did he know what he was doing to me? With a final twist of his wrench, he exhaled and sat back on his heels, stretching his arms over his head. My eyes followed the movement, drawn to the way his muscles flexed, the way the hem of his shirt lifted just enough to reveal a strip of taut, golden skin. I forced myself to look away, but it was already too late. The image was burned into my mind. There. Should be good now, he said, rising to his feet. He wiped his hands on the rag I'd given him earlier, then met my gaze. Want to test it out? I blinked. Huh. He nodded toward the sink. The water. See if it's running fine now. Oh, right. Yeah. I turned the faucet, watching as water flowed smoothly down the drain. No drips, no leaks. Everything was in perfect working order. Unlike me. Looks good, I said, clearing my throat. Thanks. No problem. Cassian leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'll clean up, then I'll be out of your way. Something about the word sent an odd pang through me. Out of my way. I didn't want him to go just yet. I wasn't ready for this charged, breath-stealing moment to end. You sure you don't want a drink first? I blurted out before I could stop myself. Water? Beer? Something? Cassian arched a brow, his smirk returning. You offering me a drink as a thank you, or as an excuse to keep me around a little longer? I swallowed hard, heat rushing to my face. Does it matter? His gaze lingered on me for a beat longer than necessary, and then he chuckled, shaking his head. Nah, it doesn't. The repair took longer than expected, which meant Cassian had to stay past sunset. The dim glow of my kitchen lights cast a warm hue over his skin, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the sheen of sweat on his collarbone. The air felt heavier, charged with something I wasn't ready to name. I grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and handed him one. He took it with a grateful nod, the bottle cool against my fingertips. Not a bad gig, he said, twisting off the cap and taking a long sip. Especially when I get to work for someone as interesting as you. I raised a brow, tilting my own bottle to my lips. Interesting? Is that a compliment? He smirked. Maybe. The air between us thickened, stretching into something unspoken. The distant hum of the city outside, the quiet ticking of the clock, the slow rise and fall of his chest. Everything around us faded, leaving only this moment, this space between us. My pulse thrummed wildly as he took another sip, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt trapped under his gaze, pinned in place by the intensity of it. "You ever had a plumber make a house call this late?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave, smooth like dark velvet. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "No. First time." Cassian leaned forward slightly, his knee grazing mine. It was barely a touch, but it sent a current straight through me like an exposed wire sparking in the dark. My breath hitched and I knew he noticed. "I like first times," he murmured, the corner of his mouth curving into something wicked, something knowing. I could have played it off, laughed, changed the subject. But I didn't. Instead, I held his gaze, my fingers tightening around the neck of my beer bottle. "Yeah." Cassian nodded, his gaze flicking briefly to my lips before meeting my eyes again. "Yeah." For a split second, the entire world seemed to hang in the balance. If I leaned in just a little, if I closed that last inch between us, I knew everything would shift. There'd be no taking it back. The question was, did I want to? The answer came when Cassian set his beer down with a quiet clink and reached out, his fingers brushing against my wrist. A test. A question. A slow, deliberate move that sent my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't pull away. His grip tightened slightly, just enough to let me know he wasn't imagining this either. "You sure you want this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I exhaled shakily, nodding. "Yeah." Cassian's lips curved into a satisfied smirk before he closed the space between us. And just like that, the dam broke. The tension that had been simmering since the moment he stepped into my apartment finally overflowed, washing over us in a heated rush. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, it was electric. Cassian leaned back against the counter, his fingers idly tracing the rim of his beer bottle. The way he watched me like he was waiting for something, sent a rush of heat through my body. I should have looked away, played it cool, but something about him made it impossible. His presence filled the room, heavy and intoxicating. The scent of soap and sweat lingered in the air between us, mingling with the crisp bite of the beer. Every glance, every shift of his body felt deliberate, as if he knew exactly what he was doing to me. "You keep looking at me like that," he murmured, setting his beer down with a quiet clink. "I might start thinking you need more than just your pipes fixed." My breath caught. There it was. No more guessing, no more wondering if I was imagining things. The tension had been building from the moment he walked in, and now it stretched so tight between us that one wrong move could snap it entirely. I let out a slow exhale, feeling bold. And what if I do? Cassian's lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. Then maybe I should do a full inspection. My pulse thundered in my ears as he pushed off the counter, closing the space between us. His fingers skimmed the edge of my shirt, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Tell me if I'm reading this wrong," he said, his voice quieter now, lower. I didn't hesitate. "You're not." That was all he needed. 1 second there was a careful distance between us, and the next, Cassian had me pinned between his body and the counter, his lips inches from mine. The heat of him, the solid press of his chest against mine, sent a dizzying wave of want crashing over me. "You're playing with fire," he murmured, his breath warm against my skin. I swallowed hard, my fingers curling into the fabric of his shirt. "Then burn me." His mouth crashed into mine and suddenly, everything else ceased to exist. The room, the broken pipes, the lingering scent of metal and damp air, it all faded into nothing as his hands slid around my waist, pulling me closer. His lips were firm, demanding, moving against mine with a hunger that sent shivers down my spine. I responded in kind, pressing into him, drinking in the taste of beer and something distinctly Cassian. My hands found his shoulders, then his hair, fingers tangling in the soft strands as I deepened the kiss. He let out a low growl of approval, his grip tightening, his body pressing me harder against the counter until there was nothing but heat and friction and the sharp edge of desire threatening to consume us both. He broke away just long enough to look at me, his dark eyes smoldering. "Tell me to stop." I shook my head, breathless. Don't you dare. His grin was wicked, and then he was kissing me again, harder this time, as if he wanted to make sure I felt every ounce of restraint snapping between us. And I did. Every brush of his lips, every press of his hands, every desperate pull of our bodies against each other, it was all fire, raw and unrelenting, and I never wanted it to end. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. One moment we were standing there, teasing, flirting. The next, Cassian had closed the space between us. His calloused fingers skimmed my jaw before tilting my chin up, his touch both rough and deliberate, like he was memorizing the feel of me. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his breath warm against my lips. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I surged forward, closing the gap as our mouths met in a slow, deep kiss. He tasted of beer and something entirely him, something addicting. His lips were firm, confident, moving against mine with an urgency that sent heat rushing through my veins. I barely had time to catch my breath before his hands roamed lower, skimming down my back before gripping my waist, pulling me flush against his solid frame. The kitchen was too small, too exposed, but neither of us cared. The flood was forgotten, the repair abandoned. Only this moment mattered. Cassian's grip tightened as he walked me backward until my spine met the counter. His fingers dug into my hips, sending a pulse of desire straight to my core. The sharp inhale he took when I slid my hands under his shirt, tracing the hard planes of his stomach, made my head spin. He broke the kiss just long enough to meet my gaze, his dark eyes blazing. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything," I admitted, my voice husky. A slow smirk tugged at his lips before he leaned in again, his mouth trailing down my jaw, nipping lightly at the sensitive skin just beneath my ear. My breath hitched as his hands slipped beneath my shirt, rough palms dragging against my skin, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. "Your trouble?" he murmured against my neck, his teeth grazing the pulse point there. I knew it the second I walked in. I let out a shaky laugh. "And yet here you are." He chuckled, the sound vibrating through me. "Yeah, here I am." His hands tightened on my waist before he lifted me onto the counter in one swift motion. The cool surface was a stark contrast to the warmth radiating between us, but I barely noticed. My legs wrapped around his waist on instinct, pulling him closer, feeling the heat of him through the thin barrier of our clothes. Cassian exhaled a curse under his breath before capturing my lips again, this time with a raw, unchecked hunger. His fingers tangled in my hair, tilting my head to deepen the kiss, and I let myself drown in it, in him. Everything else blurred. The leaking pipe, the mess on the floor, the fact that this was probably the worst idea imaginable. But in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the way Cassian touched me, like he already knew my body, like he'd been waiting for this just as much as I had. And I had no intention of stopping. I barely remembered how we got to my bedroom. 1 second, I was pressed against the counter, Cassian's lips trailing fire down my neck. The next, I was on my bed, staring up at him as he hovered over me. The room was dimly lit, shadows dancing across his face, highlighting the hunger in his dark eyes. "Last chance to back out," he said, his voice thick with restraint, as if he were giving me an escape he didn't actually want me to take. I reached up, running my fingers over the ridges of his arms, the warmth of his skin grounding me. His muscles tensed beneath my touch, his breath hitching when I dragged my nails lightly across his shoulder blades. "Not a chance." Cassian groaned, a low, needy sound that sent a shiver down my spine. Then he was on me, mouth, hands, body. There was no hesitation now, no holding back. He took his time, exploring, learning exactly how to unravel me. His lips traced a slow path down my collarbone, his stubble leaving a delicious burn in its wake. His hands roamed with purpose, memorizing every inch of me as though he were discovering something sacred. When he finally pressed against me fully, our bodies flush, I could feel every inch of him, every ounce of tension between us snapping like a live wire. He kissed me again, deeper this time, claiming, demanding. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, needing more. He groaned into my mouth, his body pressing down harder, his hips aligning with mine in a way that left no space between us. The anticipation was unbearable, every slow movement igniting something primal deep inside me. My nails dug into his back and he hissed in response, his restraint slipping. "You drive me crazy," he muttered against my skin, his breath ragged as he nipped at my jaw, then lower, his mouth mapping a path of fire down my chest. I arched into him, gasping. Then stopped holding back. Something snapped in his eyes, something wild and unchecked. He captured my lips again, his hands gripping my hips as if anchoring himself. He moved with slow, deliberate precision, drawing out every sensation, every reaction. It wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something raw and consuming. By the time he finally pushed inside, filling me with a slow, measured thrust, I was already lost. My breath hitched, my body arching into him, desperate to take him deeper, to lose myself in him completely. He stilled for a moment, his forehead resting against mine, his breath mingling with mine in the dimly lit room. "You okay?" he asked, voice strained, barely holding on. I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. "I've never been better." And then he moved, slow at first, then deeper, more desperate, as if this moment was something neither of us could ever let go of. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered curse against my skin sent me spiraling further into him. I clung to him, nails raking across his back as he pushed me higher, closer to the edge. Cassian wasn't just fixing my broken pipes. He was breaking me open, piece by piece, and I welcomed it. I clung to him, my body arching into his as he moved. It was overwhelming, the heat, the pressure, the way he filled every empty space inside me. He whispered my name, his voice rough with need, and I nearly came undone right then and there. "You okay?" he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. I nodded, unable to form words. Cassian's grip tightened on my hips as he set a rhythm, deep and controlled, drawing out every ounce of pleasure he could. The world blurred, reduced to nothing but sensation. When release finally crashed over me, I buried my face in his shoulder, gasping his name as I shattered beneath him. He followed moments later, his body trembling as he found his own release. Then silence, only our ragged breathing filling the room. We lay there, tangled together, our bodies still slick with sweat. Cassian traced lazy circles on my back, his touch unexpectedly tender. "Wasn't expecting that when I took this job," he admitted, his voice husky. I chuckled, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Neither was I. But I'm not complaining." He hummed in agreement, tightening his hold on me. "Might have to do a follow-up inspection soon. Just to make sure everything's working properly." I smirked, trailing my fingers down his chest. "I'll make sure to put in a request." Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a golden glow over Cassian's sleeping form. I watched him for a moment, memorizing the way his dark lashes rested against his cheeks, the slow rise and fall of his chest. I should have been nervous. This wasn't planned, wasn't part of my routine, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't care. As if sensing my gaze, Cassian stirred, cracking one eye open. "Morning." "Morning," I echoed, smiling. He reached for me, pulling me against him with a sleepy grin. "Think you'll be needing my services again soon?" I laughed, pressing a kiss to his lips. "Oh, definitely. I think my pipes are still in need of a little attention." Cassian groaned playfully. "Guess I better not charge you extra." I smirked. "I think we can work something out." And as he rolled me beneath him once more, I knew this was only the beginning.